Hello and welcome to 72 Dragons. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with Sheila Murphy and Jeremy Kagan. Welcome to this interview, Sheila Murphy and Jeremy Kagan. It is an honor and a pleasure to have you with us today. Sheila Murphy is a USC Annenberg Professor of Communication who received her training in social psychology at the University of Michigan, United States of America. Her work focused on determining the individual, interpersonal, community, ethnic, and cultural elements that influence people's beliefs, behaviors, and knowledge. Her research emphasizes understanding cultural diversity and adapting communications for diverse audiences, both domestically and abroad. Jeremy Kagan is a well-known director, writer, and producer with 11 feature films credits, including the box office success, Heroes, the political thriller, The Big Fix, the two-time Grand Prize winner, The Chosen, and The Journey of Nate Gant, the first American film to win a gold prize at the Moscow Film Festival. In addition, he directed more than 30 dramatic episodes, including West Wing, and was awarded an Emmy for dramatic series directing. The film Team Player was screened at the Public Health Film Festival in the annual Public American Health Association meeting in 2024. My name is Dr. Pietro Aparicio from 72 Dragons. Thank you for joining us and sharing your experiences. Without any further ado, let's begin. This question is for both. Sheila, if you don't mind to start, what prompted you to produce a movie on the COVID-19 vaccine Team Player?
Well, actually, at the very beginning of the epidemic, if I may take just a second to go back a little further, it was very evident in the United States, the death rates were coming in, and I work in public health and communication. Blacks and Latinos were dying at twice the rate as whites in the early months of the pandemic. And it was expected actually that this trend, because these were people who were called essential workers who had to be out and about and didn't have the luxury of staying home and not getting paid, were really at risk. And so the whole public health community in the United States knew that they were going to be at highest risk. And so they asked myself, and I asked Jeremy, of course, to join me once again. We had made films in the past, and so we sort of got the band back together, as it were, to try to make films that would, at first, speak to Latinos and African American populations. And in fact, we through Jeremy's contacts in Los Angeles, we were able to put together an entire African American scriptwriter, the team, the crew, the actors, and except for the three of us who kind of, with my assistant who stuck out, they were all African American. In the Happy Birthday Granny, which turned out to be sort of a funny, humorous take that diffused the myths about COVID vaccine, like that no, you would not become sterile if you were vaccinated, or no, you would not become impotent if you were vaccinated, and other myths. That it was too expensive, or that they would turn you into the police or something if you went to go get a vaccine. We had 6 specific myths that people were commonly shared, and we attacked each one of those 6, both in an African American film called Happy Birthday Granny, and a second film that was for Latinx populations called Reasons and Rumors. Actually, also that had a all Latinx cast and crew and scriptwriter, and it took a little bit more somber of a tone, still had a humorous underlay, but also a story. And the importance is that everything Jeremy and I do is a story because we know that stories are how people naturally, for millennium, have gained information. And so it was after we produced these and tested them to make sure that they actually had the impact that we thought they should, which they did. We tested them in an online experiment of 600 unvaccinated women, both African American and Latinx, and they were very successful in convincing them. And so we felt comfortable releasing them to the public. And so it was after that we sort of got attention at the White House, and that we were asked, well, now we need to move to vaccinating children. And so that's how Team Player came about, is that we realized that it was going to be a big challenge to convince parents. And at this point, oftentimes white parents, to get their children vaccinated because of the anti-vax sentiment that was circulating. And so we produced Team Player, which was a story about a group of kids playing soccer, boys and girls together, very typical scene in Los Angeles, and the parents hanging out on the sidelines, cheering their child on, but also talking about whether they had been vaccinated or not, why or why not. And that was kind of the vehicle for the story of basically, again, going after some of these same myths with some additional myths that were specific to children.
Thank you for sharing. And Jeremy, as a film director and producer, what prompted you to work on this production?
Well, first of all, to be able to use cinema to actually help other people in whatever areas of their lives they could use inspiration, if not assistance, is something I've been doing for many, many years. Many of my films are dealing with social issues. I teach that in Media for Social Change at the School of Cinema and Arts at the University of Southern California. So this is something that I know very, very well in terms of my intention of how to make film be of value. Now, be entertained by film is good enough. But one of the concepts that came very clear to me is oftentimes attributed to the Hopis, and that is who controls the story rules. And so the issue becomes that word, who controls the story. And we're seeing this politically everywhere we go. Anybody who's got the story, that suddenly becomes the truth. So what we've discovered, and I even have this phrase, is that facts inform, but stories transform. So we actually, even before the projects that Sheila was just mentioning, our first project was something called Tamale Lesson, and it was an interesting experiment to saying, what's the best way to use film to help get a message out there? Now, oftentimes, particularly in the health world, people think, oh, it should be a very good, solid documentary with all kinds of facts and maybe vox populi and whatever that is, and you'll get the doctors and the experts, and they'll tell you how to behave. What we realized, and this is through the incredible work of a man named Miguel Sabito, who's credited with inventing something called entertainment education. And the concept of this is that if you can tell a story where your audience gets involved with characters that they then identify with, then when those characters are challenged with certain kinds of problems and choices, you too feel how you might take on those same problems and choices. So this idea of using a narrative story as distinguished from an informational documentary became something that we, Sheila and I, began to advance in all of these projects that we do for the Change-Making Media Center. And so here's the fascinating issue. When this happens, and we actually made a documentary informational about this particular issue, as well as the narrative that we made, and we showed both of them to various audiences to see which one would be more motivated to take on the behavior, the health behavior that was being encouraged in this project called Tamale Lesson, which had to do with taking Pap tests to avoid cervical cancer. And it turned out statistically that more people who saw the narrative, the story, and identified with these characters were now willing to, in fact, in their own lives, make changes. And that got written up in all kinds of medical journals. So this is I think the most important thing that I can offer in this conversation is you may have an issue of health that you want people to be informed about. But if you put that within a story where characters are confronted, and oftentimes characters are confronted with three possibilities. This is what Miguel Sabito discovered. There's one character who doesn't want to do this. I don't want to take a vaccine. There's another character who's very much committed to it. This is a good thing. I want to take care of my children. And there's one character that is in between, doesn't know. So by having those three characters in your story, whatever the story is, the viewer gets to hear the negative, the positive, and then the in-between place where most of us are, and then gets to make the choice themselves. And that process of using this kind of storytelling is extremely effective. So we're constantly encouraging people who come to us to say, we need to have you help us make a film for an NGO. And as we all know now, more and more people are going to be coming because it ain't going to be coming from the federal sources anymore. We're telling them, let us help you tell a story with characters that gets the issues that you want out there. And this will be far more effective.
Narrative. And you hear a lot of narrative in public health especially. And it's great to see that it's being used through film, which is a great tool to tell story and narrative. Now, there has been extensive research on anti-vaccine attitude and myth among adults in the United States. Could you share any interesting facts that you learned about this project while making this film?
Well, one of the things that did happen during the period leading up to making Team Player was what we thought was going to be the racial disparity with, Blacks and Hispanics being out front at dying at a higher rate did not happen. By the end of the 2-3 years into the pandemic, you started to see a flip, actually, and you almost never see this in public health. It was very stunning to the public health practitioners because you almost never see lines cross. Where now the Hispanics and the African Americans in the United States were dying at a lower rate than the whites, and this was stunning. And in fact, the whites weren't staying stable. They were going up. They were dying at a higher rate. Why were they dying at a higher rate? They were dying at a higher rate because of this myths, this anti-vaccine myths. Again, this is going to make myself and my child sterile. This is going to, and it became very political here in the US, unfortunately. I mean, there was never any reason for the vaccine to become a political, anyway, it did. They, in fact, at the very end, I don't know if I ever told you this, Jeremy, but I was approached by the Biden administration towards the end to see if I could make a film for white male rural Republicans. And I actually said, I don't know that any story is going to reach them. You know what I mean? I think it was at that point, it was so political, so dug in their beliefs. I just felt that it was at least beyond my capacity. Maybe I should have handed it off.
I wish I'd known, because I could come up with a whole bunch of stories that might have been effective for that particular group.
Well, let me tell you
thing that Sheila has taught, which is that you do research first with the group that you want to communicate with, and find out, in fact, what their particular needs are. So, for example, in a Tamale lesson, which was about encouraging at-risk women to take pap tests, what we were learning was that the different cultures, in Los Angeles specifically, had different approaches to health issues, some of the approaches of which we didn't know. Now, in that particular case, we were also talking about the issue of sex. Well, for some of the cultures here in Los Angeles, you just don't talk about that. Now, This is something I didn't know, but that meant in our storytelling, we needed to deal with that. And that was really a powerful thing. But another major powerful thing was also religious beliefs, which was also something that I don't think I was as aware of. And one of them was the idea that some people have the concept, their religious concept is, if they're sick, God meant them to be sick. Now, the response to that is, yeah, but God also meant to create doctors. So we're hoping, but this was also new for me. Then another concept that became new for me, and this was earlier in the work, actually before Sheila and I worked together, where I was doing a whole series of pieces for the American Civil Liberties Union in the United States. All kinds of pieces about racial justice, about dissent, all the things that the ACLU takes on. And one of the things that was being put out was that one thing that people are really concerned with, which I didn't know until the research was given us, was fairness. Mm-hmm. People really care about fairness from wherever they come from, whatever political beliefs they have. And we didn't really know that. When we knew that, then as we were making these pieces about these various issues, we were always putting in the back of our mind, how can these characters take on that concept? What's just fair? And that really was very powerful and a learning lesson for me.
Great. Sounds like a lot of discovering while making this film and other films. Now, Sheila, you have worked with several popular television programs to assess their impact on viewers.
Yeah.
How do you think Team Player changed the attitude and behaviors of parents and children toward COVID-19 vaccinations? What's particular about Team Player?
Well, let me just tell you a little bit about the work I do in the United States very briefly with Hollywood Health and Society. It is a center that's located at the Annenberg School, and so they're my colleagues. And with Hollywood Health and Society and popular television programs that have, many of which have medical content like ER or Grey's Anatomy, but many of them are just sort of shows that have incidental health storylines like West Wing. Jeremy had mentioned the president had a particular disease. But what we do with Hollywood Health and Society for the past 20 years, we've been working to try to see if the scriptwriters could put in accurate symptoms and not just make them up, right? Literally, there was never, up to 20 years ago, there was no responsibility among the writers. They were creatives. They got creative with symptoms, but you really don't want people thinking that brain cancer comes and goes. And actually that happened on a very popular medical show called Emergency Room ER, where one actor, every time his contract came up, they would bring back his brain cancer. As a result, the audience started thinking that brain cancer wasn't really that bad because it could come and go. No, it doesn't come and go. But what we do is we have a tip sheet. We meet periodically with any show that wants to talk to us about any disease they want to. We have, if anyone just wants to go to Hollywood Health and Society's website, they have tip sheets for hundreds of different diseases, telling you what's the cause, what's the symptoms, what are the potential treatments, and the prognosis. And they're great, but the problem with the US is that we only can sort of suggest, right? We don't have control of the final product, as opposed to other countries, which I know in India, for example, you mentioned that some of your people are in India, where I did Jasus Vijay, Detective Vijay with the BBC Media Action, and we were in control of the script. And Jasus Vijay, this famous detective, ended up being HIV positive after we got people to really into the show and really liking this character. We revealed that he was, in fact, HIV positive. That is a different ballgame. And that's more like what Jeremy and I are able to do from scratch, when we can really make the story for ourselves, right, from scratch, as opposed to what I do with the US, which is really sort of work with the scriptwriters on smaller storylines within a series. But nevertheless, we've shown that those have real impact. Back to Team Player, though, I will say that regardless of whether I'm doing work with Hollywood Health and Society or with any work I do with Jeremy, we test everything. And I want to really push the idea that, you might think this is a great storyline and this is going to just change people's attitudes and behavior, but it might change them in the wrong direction. Right? There have been cases where a campaign or a storyline has the opposite effect that you intended. So you just want to make sure that that a pretest is always done before we release any film publicly.
It's a good lead way for the next question. Well, for you, Jeremy, it's how do you describe your creative process? You've done a lot of different films, particularly regarding Team Player, because you got the facts from the experts, but then, as you say, you are the storyteller. You're part of the team that is more creative. So how do you combine the facts with the story? And if you can, particularly with these film Team Player.
Actually, Sheila does something actually pretty remarkable. She actually puts together a sort of chart that says, this is the most important thing that needs to be put out. This is something that is maybe not as important. This is something that maybe we're never going to be able to get to. And it's really thought out, and Sheila understands really, really well that you can only make 5 or 6 points. The organization may want, we've got 20 things we need to get said. No one's going to remember them. There's no way to do that and not keep it from being uninteresting or boring, which is the worst thing you can do in any kind of storytelling. So she'll often make a point to these people who are asking us to help them, limit it to a number of issues, maybe 5, maybe 6. Once that's done, she will give us a good analysis of how that's going to be done. Then I will then put together the filmmakers. I know lots and lots of filmmakers, young and also far more experienced. So I can approach them and say, are you interested in doing this work? Particularly the younger filmmakers. And now, because of the nature of where we are, if we're going to do a story that's going to be about Latins, then I want to make sure that that's the people that are telling the story and that's the filmmakers that are making it. I will supervise in that sense because I can help them and I have a lot more experience oftentimes. But we want to really allow the people themselves to tell their stories as distinguished from our imposing on their culture, which we may not be as familiar with, our story. So that's very, very intentional. And I'm lucky enough to be able to approach filmmakers from just working on a piece that was an Asian piece. Well, got all the Asian filmmakers there. So it's a way of allowing these oftentimes newer artists to be able to collectively express their point of view about reality. And there's this wonderful quote that I saw yesterday, which is this idea of what art is supposed to do. It's from Bertolt Brecht, and he said, art is not just a mirror to reality. Art is a hammer to reshape it. And I feel like that's our responsibility as cinema makers, to use cinema to reshape the reality for many people who need their point of view expanded so that they can be healthier.
A hammer to shape reality. I like that. Sheila, you have made at least 2 more other short films around COVID-19 vaccinations. Could you tell briefly about those films?
Well, these are, again, with Jeremy, it was at the beginning of the pandemic. And they had we did exactly the process that Jeremy's talking about. In fact, he may be better suited to answer this question. But for example, I gave him 6 myths that we needed to overcome. And that were out there in both the African American and Latinx community. They were these 2 films, Reasons and Rumors and Happy Birthday Granny, were both specifically for those 2 audiences, again, with cast, crew, writers, script. We were the only white people. And essentially, we allowed the scriptwriters to, as long as they got those 6 myths in there, to handle them very differently. One was, as I said, one was very humorous, Happy Birthday Granny, and it was very, the pace of the speaking was very quick. We were very careful to also match where we released that to. So, for example, we went to African American churches and community centers and et cetera. The Latin film was more, they wanted a little bit more somber approach because they had knew people who had died and they didn't think that sort of heavy humor was appropriate. And so we start out in a church praying for the people who have passed of COVID, which is very different, the sort of tone than Happy Birthday Granny. But again, Reasons and Rumors, which is what the title of the Latinx film was, extremely effective, and so much so that the U.S. government paid to have it put copies of it put in all of the kits that were given to these promotoras who went to around their neighborhoods, telling people to get vaccinated. And we were able to find out that through just Reasons and Rumors, we know that there were an additional 6 million shots, what we call shots in arms, in the Latinx communities across the country, because we had this network of promotors that was national.
Thank you. And Jeremy, as the film producer and director, what were the highlights of, as you were working on this film, and what were some of the challenges?
That's always a question that any filmmaker gets, and you say, okay, what was the most fun and what was the most difficult? And each film just presents its own difficulties. Filmmaking is a collective experience, and there are lots of different kinds of artists that you're working with, and there are all kinds of unknowns that you're working with. Oh, you intended to have this location, and guess what? The couple of days before, you can't shoot there anymore because they're tearing it down. I think what more important is to be able to adjust to changing realities as a filmmaker and take advantage of them. Because sometimes, if this doesn't work, a new idea will emerge that will allow you to, in fact, potentially make the piece even better. So it is a combination of feeling the pressure and anxiety of the unknown, even with all your preparation, and then entering it into it and also saying, out of the unknown may come some magic, may come something unexpected. And oftentimes with an actor's performance at one moment, they may say something in a way that you never expected, and it's far more effective than it was when you were preconceiving it and writing it. So this issue of being able to sort of be in the moment and adjust to it as it's happening is sort of part of the profession. If you can do that, then you're not going to be totally stressed out. But, I know lots of filmmakers, and some very famous ones, who are incredibly stressed out when they're making movies because, this is not working, and this actor got sick, and what are we going to do? And we're shooting during COVID. And okay.
Well, Jeremy, I do want to remind you, though, and give a shout out to our assistant producer, Ashley Phelps, who we had to test every actor and every crew member for COVID each day on set. And that Ashley and I managed to find enough COVID tests. And I had to buy them from this backstreet deal with my own money. It was this very cloak and dagger thing because there was no tests to be had, and we had to shoot, and we had everyone's coming, and it was talk about stress. Jeremy might not be stressed. I was stressed.
I was too. Don't worry. But
to work out.
But here's the interesting thing. Okay, Ashley, who we just mentioned, is a wonderful human being and a very, very enthusiastic human being, and she's studying science and health. Well, this is what happened. She started to work on this production and started to see how much fun it can be to make a movie. Part of it is because you're meeting all these people and they're all creative, whether they're 10 years old or whether they're 80 years old. And you suddenly have this experience of constantly working with others to do something, and in these cases, to do something that might do some good. So I could see she was about to go, well, maybe I'll stop working in the health and become a movie maker. But she was really good at it.
She is. He stole one of my best graduate students.
Very exciting. So a lot was happening that was not planned. Sheila Murphy and Jeremy Kagan, thank you for your time. Your film was inspiring and helped dispel myths about COVID-19 vaccines. It inspired so many parents and children to get vaccinated. We wish you success in your future projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you, Sheila, for believing in me.
Okay. Thank you so much.